Hey everyone, welcome to More Than Work this week. If it's your first time here, thanks for checking it out. And if you've been here before, thanks for coming back. I am so excited about a couple things that are going on. One, I don't know how many of you that listen are on Clubhouse, but I have a More Than Work club on Clubhouse. It's an app that's iOS only right now, but it'll open up to Android soon. So definitely find More Than Work on Clubhouse, and you can find me at the name Rabia C also. But it's a lot of fun, and I'm starting to do like live recordings there, and I'm starting to do Q&As there. So I have a few coming up. But if you want to kind of be behind the scenes and listen to the recording happen live on Clubhouse, you can start doing that. I have a schedule for the rooms there, and I should put the schedule on my website soon. Also, if you happen to be in the UK and listening, I'm going to be starting to do some shows for the upcoming Brighton and Camden Fringe festivals, so you can definitely find that on my website, rabiasaid.com. And if you're not, but you want to see some of my comedy, because in addition to the podcast and work, I do comedy. As you've probably heard me mention on the show, it's kind of like being vegan. I always bring it up in a conversation. I'm not vegan, but I'm a comic, and that's what I mean. But a lot of times vegans bring up being vegan, if you know that joke. Or people who don't eat gluten bring that up, which I do bring that up quite a bit. So anyway, I'll be doing some previews of my show on Zoom as well. So just kind of, if you want to keep track of any of that stuff, you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, or you can just find recordings. But let's talk about this week's guest. And that's the other thing I'm really excited about. Her name is Lucia Nuñez, and she was on the Biden inaugural committee, and she worked on the Biden campaign, and she's a political operative and really just such an enthusiastic person and so spirited about what she does. But I actually attended a class she did during National Day of Service, like during that weekend leading up to Martin Luther King Jr. Day, that the Biden inaugural committee put on about equity. And it was part of their diversity and inclusion efforts, and I really learned a lot, and I took away a lot from that will kind of stick with me as I continue to pursue service and serving others. But what was really cool, besides the fact that the curriculum was wonderful and so insightful, is that Lucia created that curriculum in conjunction with other people, I'm sure, on the committee, and delivered it along with some other people. And I followed her on Twitter afterwards and ended up DMing her and just asked her if she would do the podcast. And she said yes. I couldn't believe it, because I'm really trying to get a variety of guests on here. And it just, to me, it was fantastic to get someone that is so young and enthusiastic about what they're doing and really knows their purpose. And also, for me, is like stands for causes that I stand for. This is going to be in big contrast to an interview I have coming up that was really difficult for me, where it was actually with someone who I have very divergent views from. And I, to that end, want to warn people, because this isn't a political podcast. This is really a podcast about people finding their purpose and finding meaning outside of their work, and also finding meaningful work. And for Lucia, that happens to be working as a political operative for the Democratic Party. Now, it is possible that someone listening may be offended by just even discussing Democratic politics. If you are, and if you don't want to listen, I completely understand, and I encourage you to find other episodes and to come back, because the intention of this podcast is not to be political, but the guest happens to be involved in politics. And I just want to let people know that up front, so just to show respect for listeners who, you know, may not agree with some of what's said. And I just want you to know that this is an episode that I'm very, very excited about, but I also respect that it might not excite everybody. For those of you who are ready, you're going to hear an ad, and this might be one of the last ads you hear, because I am going to switch hosts, and then we'll start the podcast. And if I did switch hosts by the time you hear this, then you won't hear the ad. So I probably didn't need to mention that. But anyway, here we go. Thank you. Welcome to More Than Work, the podcast reminding you that your self-worth is defined by more than your job title. I'm Rabia, an IT project manager, comedian, nonprofit volunteer, and sometimes activist. Every week, I'll chat with a guest about pursuing passions outside of work or creating meaningful opportunities inside the workplace. As you listen, I hope you'll be inspired to do the same. All right, everyone. Well, I am really excited because I actually attended a training that my next guest did on the National Day of Service this year, which was also Martin Luther King Day. And it was really cool. It was part of the Biden inauguration team and what they were doing for that day. And I'm really glad that she agreed to be on the podcast. So I have political operative Lucia Nuñez. How are you, Lucia?
Hi, Rabia. I'm doing so great. Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm so excited to be here. I'm doing well.
Good. And I'm really excited to have you here. So at least we'll have good energy during this, right?
At least, yeah.
Yeah. So do you just want to, I said you're a political operative, but do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners?
Yes, I have been a campaign staffer on Democratic campaigns the last, 5-ish years. I've worked at a couple of Democratic consulting firms. And so I'm kind of a campaign nomad. I've just been moving around the country working on various competitive campaigns, the Biden-Harris presidential campaign, congressional campaigns, the mayoral campaign. It's been an amazing career. I'm so happy to have been doing this.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And I'm a person who's volunteered a lot, but not ever actually officially worked on a campaign. So
God bless you.
Yeah,
we love volunteers.
That's good. So what led you into the world of politics? And is that something you always wanted to do, when you were in school and everything?
I didn't necessarily expect to be doing this when I was in middle school and high school. I kind of thought I would go into nonprofits, but in college, I became a very angry feminist. I should say now I'm Latina. And so a lot of little things I experienced growing up, I didn't even realize that they were microaggressions until I joined a social justice affinity group in college. It was called Café con Leche at my school. And I heard about other people's experience. And I was like, oh, I thought that I was just, kind of an awkward person sometimes. And I, in college, being part of those groups, taking the classes that I took, it really allowed me to gain the perspective that all of these issues are connected. And little comments that people make about Mexicans and illegal immigrants, their words, not mine, by the way, that is tied to, tax policy. It's tied to education. It's tied to reproductive justice. And so by the end of college, I was just so angry about everything. And I just wanted to tear it up and raise hell in American politics. And so I did what a lot of people in that position do. And I moved to DC. And I was lucky to get an internship that was a little bit paid, but it didn't pay a lot. And so I actually worked as a Segway tour guide to pay my rent and bills. 10 out of 10 recommend that as a side job. If you need a side job and you're in DC, I don't know if they're hiring a lot during a pandemic, but it was so fun. And so from there, I got a big girl job. And then all my mentors in DC were telling me, if you want to be good at this stuff and make an impact long term, you need to work on campaigns and you need to learn what moves people and how to win hearts and minds. And so that's how I ended up in campaigns. And then I just couldn't stop. We thought in 2016 Hillary was going to win. Of course, that's not a hot take. And then all of a sudden it was about flipping the House. It was about winning the 2020 election. So it's been so exciting.
Yeah, and so busy, right? I mean, really busy. That's funny. The Segway Tours. This is totally an aside, but I was going to go on a Segway tour with my best friend from growing up in Minnesota, right? So we're in the parking lot in the training part, and I fall and
oh no,
totally dislocate my knee.
Ow.
And I was like, so I'm really impressed by you now just because you were able to, as a job, ride a Segway every day, and I couldn't even go through training. So.
I'm so sorry that you fell.
That's
that
crazy.
is, when I interviewed for the job, I was very afraid of falling. And I saw a couple people take a fall. Yeah, once you get off balance, it's like, shoot.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess it was better in the parking lot, but that's a cool job. And yeah, I don't know, the whole DC touring thing. That's awesome. Where were you from at that before? I mean, you went in California, right? Or
well, okay, so we moved around a lot, like growing up, because of like my dad was in the military and then like my parents' jobs. But right now, kind of Colorado and California are my main two homes. I've spent, maybe like almost half of my childhood in Colorado, and then I went to school in California. I went to college there, and then I worked on 2 campaigns there. So I've spent actually equal time. So I'm kind of like a dual citizen of Colorado and California. But I had only been to DC for like a school trip type situation until I moved there. The monuments are just magical. And being a Segway tour guide is so fun because people come in from all over the country, from different countries. We take them on these tours. They're so excited to just be in the capital, and they're excited to hear the stories. And everybody has like a different highlight of the tour for them. For some people, it's like a memorial from something that a family member served in. For some of them, it's, like the White House or the National, some random monument or part of the city that just like speaks to them and like what they think of our country. So it was really a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. And it's a beautiful city too. So that's really cool. So then like recently one of my friends was a guest on the podcast, which ends up being a lot of my friends right now, but he got into city council in the last year. And he said it really made him realize that all politics are local. And I know you've worked on various campaigns. I mean, of course, the Biden one is the big one because that's the presidential, but also local ones. How do you feel about that statement? Like, have you found that to be true? All politics are local?
Okay, for me, yes and no, but kind of no in a way. And I'll tell you why. But first, I'll tell you the yes part. I agree with your friend in that everybody's lived experiences and their local community affects their political views and behaviors. If people around them are voting, how people think about elected officials, how people feel about government and the role of government, and literally their lived experiences, like privileges, oppressions that they've experienced. So in that regard, yes. And in the regard of like, if you want to win, you have to organize at the local level. Absolutely. However, I found that for the stuff that I worked on, I mostly worked in federal politics, right? Presidential and congressional. And for me, it kind of feels like everything gets to be national. And in a congressional campaign, you might think that it's about the local community, but congressional campaigns do encourage people to think at the national level because that's the impact that the Congress member can make. I felt I was working for a Democratic member of Congress in 2016, trying to defend that seat. It was one of the most competitive seats that we were trying to defend. We were successful, luckily, but for a lot of people, it was about Trump more so than the Democrat versus the Republican at the local level, because these national politics, it's a hot issue. It stirs up a lot of feelings in people. And so, the reason I took the job was because I wanted to work against Trump. And a lot of the volunteers who we had, they felt the same. And sometimes individual things about the people rather than just the overall parties are important to people, as they should be. Our Republican opponent had done some really, really bad stuff that people absolutely should care about. But, right after that, in 2018, I was working in a swing district, another place in California that we were trying to flip, that a Republican had office. For that, you would not believe the extent to which it was about Trump. We, in a couple months, in the summer of 2018, we registered like 5,000 voters, which is a lot for a congressional district. And we didn't really do it by saying, we have this great Democrat, let me tell you all about him. We would go, outside of Walmarts and to college campuses, and we'd say, can you help me defeat Trump? And they'd be like, what do you need? And then we would make the case that if you want to defeat Trump, you have to vote for the Democrat for Congress, because we have a Republican in Congress right now who is a rubber stamp of Trump and who voted to take away the ACA. And we have a Democrat whose vision is the opposite of that. And so for the work I've been doing, a lot of it has been impacted by how people think of a lot of things nationally.
Interesting. But
that's not saying that all politics aren't local, like they are, but then there's also this national thing affects everything, and things that we talk about in the news at the national level, local candidates running for, even city council get asked about that stuff, even if they don't necessarily have a lot that they could even do about it, because people just care so much, as they should, when absolutely terrible things are happening.
Yeah. And that's interesting. And I mean, he talked a lot about just in their town, like defund the police isn't an option because they only have like 5 police officers.
Right.
So,
right.
But it's an important issue to him.
Yeah.
And to people. But then they were doing stuff like hiring a social worker part-time. That was something they were adding that they didn't have before. So it was kind of cool to see that. What district were you working in California?
I worked in District 7 and then District 10.
Okay. And so I was volunteering in 25, which was another.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, in 2016 and 2018 and not this year or last year. Oh, cool. So do you have aspirations to hold office yourself?
I don't, actually. I don't. I see myself working in the government or like major democratic organizations like the party or Planned Parenthood. Not really office myself, I'm trying not to do anything terrible that would preclude me from being elected. But that's not the vision right now.
Yeah, you feel like you're making an impact in the positions you're taking.
Yeah. And I moved around so much that I would maybe be like a carpetbagger wherever I went. So it's like other people should maybe hold those seats who are from, those communities.
Yeah, and know the community, not just come in and say, "Oh, I'm running here because this is where I think I can win."
Yeah.
Yeah, so your career is really unique in that you're not at a 9 to 5 and you're not always like planning to be somewhere for 20 years or something like in some careers, because you really can't. I mean, I guess if you worked for a certain Congress people, maybe you could, but that's about it. Yeah. And you haven't just been living somewhere for years. So can you talk about the nature of working on campaigns, from like the travel to just the temporary nature of it?
Yeah, it is a wild ride. It really is. It's very intense. The standard work week is about 80-hour weeks for campaigns. Like it is wild. You're working evenings and weekends, particularly if you work in field, because that's when volunteers are available, because you have stuff to do from 9 to 5. And then outside of 9 to 5, volunteers are available. And so you're running volunteer events, calling volunteers. It's very intense, not just hour-wise and like at times physically, but emotionally too, because it's something that most staffers feel very personally about. And a lot of people feel a high level of accountability to doing a really good job because it's an election with high stakes. So that's one thing. And then another, like you said, is moving. A lot of people move to work on campaigns. Campaigns usually try to hire local folks as well, but usually that's supplemented by people who move. And I have been people who move a lot of the time. And the beautiful thing about it is you kind of have this team of a bunch of often young people who are moving around the country for this exciting work, and nobody really knows anybody else, and you're at work all the time. And so the people who you work with, they kind of become your family and your best friends. And my best friends, most of my best friends, are people who I met working on a campaign. We're there all the time. We understand each other. I've traveled with my campaign friends, internationally. People even date coworkers who they met. I know so many people who met because of campaigns who are now engaged or, married. And so the shared experience really is magnified by the intensity of the situation. So that's a fun part about it. Another thing about it, the work ends when the election ends. And so you're always job searching. I'm job searching right now. And I don't know if some of your listeners might be job searching, but some of the wisdom that I've found for myself, for anybody job searching, is that you have to have like other things going on in your life. And so for me, I've been like trying to I've just been upping the amount of like new recipes that I'm trying out and new workouts that I'm trying out and catching up with friends. Like, you have to have other things going on to survive it mentally. And it can be a little bit of a roller coaster, the job search itself, because, you know, one day you look in the mirror and you're like, wow, I'm so amazing. I'm going to get all the jobs. I'm going to be a superstar. You wake up another day and you're like, oh my God, nobody's going to hire me. What have I done? What am I doing? And so it really is like, it's an emotional roller coaster. The other thing I want to say about campaigns ending early is that it's kind of an equity issue. Campaigns are not that accessible of a career to pursue because you're going to be out of a job in 4 months. And so if you need work, if you need a paycheck, then that's a big risk to take. And so it's easier for people to pursue this career if they have a little bit of a financial cushion, if you can live with your parents, if you have a lot of savings, and that is tied to all other equity issues. And, you know, every time people hire, because campaigns are often such a small organization that pops up and ends, campaigns don't always have very intentional hiring practices. And so, you know, one of the biases that can happen is because of implicit bias, a lot of us tend to hire people who are like us. I say us as people. This is something that campaigns are definitely working on, some more than others, but campaigns do have a bad reputation that is true in some cases for sometimes having kind of a bro-y culture. And it's kind of a problem. You wouldn't, in some ways, it's like some people would expect that because it's politics and old boys club, but, you know, some people wouldn't because it's Democrats. And this is something that's very actively changing. And thanks to the public for caring so much about representation and diversity, campaigns are held more accountable for having more diverse staff and, you know, more local staff. So that's one of the kind of interesting things that happens because of the nature of the work. I'm making this career, I don't know if I'm making it sound like hell, but it's really exciting. It'll delight you, it'll dazzle you, it'll nurture you, but it'll also tear you apart if you let it, you know? And it's so intense. I think I've cried in front of every single one of my bosses. Like, who among us hasn't, right?
No, I mean, that's true. And I know there was some movie or something like or whatever. It's been an idea, like never cry at work. And I just think,
no, cry at work, do it.
Yeah, you shouldn't always cry at work. Like maybe, you know, don't every day, but like sometimes that's that's a response you're having. It's it's your physiology. Like you've gotten to the point where you're crying. Well, that's all right. You know, if someone doesn't get it, then it's kind of like, well, what's wrong with you? And why don't you cry? Maybe, you know,
no, we are human. One of the good things that is happening is, like I said, campaigns are changing in terms of hiring and people being more intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this year was the first year that the Democratic campaign in the general election had like actual diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings. We had them for staff. Every single staff member was required to do this training on all the coordinated campaigns. Every manager was trained on equitable management practices, and volunteers, you can't make volunteers take this training, but volunteers had the opportunity to attend trainings as well. So that's one good thing. Another good thing that's happening is the lifestyle is slowly starting to change. I mean, at least in some levels. In some campaigns, it's not, you know.
Right.
But over time, I think campaign staffers are getting paid more now than they were 10 years ago, for one. And now campaign workers at the most junior level are starting to organize and form unions. And it's great because we're talking about an 80-hour week versus a 55-hour work week. And campaign workers have historically been paid salaried, but when you divide a salary, even like a so-called decent salary, by the number of hours, suddenly you're like making less than minimum wage, and it's very sad.
Yeah.
But now, so some of these unions, part of their, bargaining was to get paid hourly instead, so that
that's smart.
Yeah, so that people are getting paid, a more actually for the hours, and in the end, people are usually getting overtime because usually, we need staff to do more things in October. So that's a really good thing that is happening. And sometimes people bargain for other benefits too, but that is slowly making this career more and more accessible to people who don't have the same financial cushion.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good thing that happens. And okay, I have to tell you something. So when I saw the name of your podcast, I think
Uh-huh.
maybe like you followed me on Twitter and then I followed you back.
Yeah, yeah.
But I saw the name of the podcast, More Than Work, and I was like, ha, that's not me. Um, because, and then I read the description. A lot of us in this career, and I think in many careers, especially when there's like a cause involved,
Yeah.
so much of our identity is our work and
Yeah.
like what your job is. And I'm not talking about just title, but like
Mm-hmm.
what the nature of your work is and what the impact of it is. And something that I am like honestly still working on is like trying to be more of a person
Yeah.
outside of my career, because you know it's we have to value that parts of our humanity. And so
Mm-hmm.
right now, you know, I'm unemployed, I'm job searching. And this is another hot tip to job searchers: tell your family and friends you're on sabbatical. Okay, don't tell them you're unemployed if you don't want them to worry about you, because you know there are so many negative stigmas to being
Mm-hmm.
unemployed. For And that's a whole other thing of its own, you know, like
Yeah.
equity wise. And some people, it's like, especially if you need a job right away for money, you can't afford to be out here being like, I'm on sabbatical. You know, like that's
Yeah.
not for everybody. But one of the things that helps me do, at least to myself mentally, is like, yes, I'm going to apply for jobs. A lot of it is networking, of course. A lot of it's keeping in touch with people. But I try to use my sabbatical time intentionally. I try to like lean into like every single day off that I have. I try to like savor every like morning smoothie that I drink slowly and every like long session I have cuddling with my dogs. You cannot like pause the rest of your life because you're working for a good cause. Like you're still a human and you still
Yeah.
have to like invest in that part of yourself. So honestly, it's something that I'm still working on. I'm not even going to lie to you.
Well, yeah. And so it's funny. So a couple things. So one, well, going back really quick to the whole hourly versus salaried, it's
Yeah.
funny because everyone does that at some point when they're, and you do that conversion of your salary to an hourly rate
Whew.
on the worst day you're having. You always go and go,
Yes.
I'm being overworked. F these people.
I'm
They're
not
only
paying
paying
enough to
me
deal
this
with
much an
this.
hour. Right. And I
Yeah.
remember exactly when I did that. I was working in a call center.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was doing some crazy shift because it was a flower company. It was Valentine's Day, so we're coming up on
Oh,
Valentine's Day right
gosh.
now when we're
Yeah.
recording this. But I remember working like 16 hours, and I added up all week, and then I was making so little, and I was so mad. And I know exactly when you do that,
Yeah.
and I think if you're getting paid hourly, what's smart about that is then the person paying you is going to be more conscientious of what they're giving you to do,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
It might be cheaper to hire another person and employ another person to do a normal amount of work than
Mm-hmm.
it will be to pay the other one
Yep.
overtime.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Exactly.
that's smart.
Exactly.
As far as the podcast, yeah, it's more than work, and so and I've been exactly like that where I've done nothing but work. And I think what intrigued me about talking to you was that you are doing work that reflects your values.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right, even when you're doing
Even
that,
still.
even still, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's a tricky thing to learn. And as far as the job search, I remember going through that. I've been employed most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
since I was like 15 and a half, I think was when you could start working.
Mm-hmm.
I've had probably 6 months total in that time, and I'm 41 that I didn't work. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been really lucky. But
Mm-hmm.
the first time I was looking for a job when I got laid off and had to get another one, I was obsessed with it, and I was spending all my time
Yeah.
doing that. And then the next time I did the same thing as you, and I think it is a good point. It's really important because it's one of the most just difficult things to be waiting to hear back
Mm-hmm.
and not hear back, or to hear a no or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it does start to be like really degrading to you. And
Yeah.
like, yeah. And you have other things to do, and you do them because once you've emailed your application, sitting at your computer staring at it isn't going to get anyone to respond faster. So yeah,
Right.
go have your smoothie, have your walk, have your
Yeah.
cuddle time, whatever. So those are good points. And
Yeah.
you have to learn them quite often.
You
Those
do.
lessons.
You do. And I get a little bit better at it every time, you know, every time, because now working on campaigns, luckily after several campaigns, I expect it. I know it's going to happen. I'm able to plan for it, financially, logistically, to have an unknown amount of time where I'm unemployed and then say, I'm going to move who knows where, who knows when. But you really, like, when your whole self-worth is like your career and your job, and then you don't have a job, it's like, whoopsie, who am I? And you have to like have some things to remind yourself who you are.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think it'd be hard too, because I know I always get really invested in where I work. And right now, like, I'm a consultant on projects, and I still get super invested, and like I feel like I'm part of the company I'm working with, and like they're part of my team and whatever. And so you're in a career, again, what we've talked about is you're handling like really high stakes stuff, like for someone winning and really them having a job for X number of years. But it's also like a super emotional thing to, become attached to maybe a candidate or your colleagues and then to move on. So how do you handle all that, like, emotionally? Do you have a way that you do that?
Do I handle it though? I lean into it. Like I said, I have cried at least once. I don't cry every day at work, I've cried at least once in front of every single one of my bosses for various reasons. I embrace it, and I try to be there for others. And the communal aspect of campaigns is so important, not just with fellow staff, but with volunteers. And like, everybody is there because we care. And so sometimes it actually helps us work through any conflict or issues, because we're, when you do active listening, you're listening to the other person's perspective, and then you're tying it to what are our shared values. And luckily, when you're on a mission-driven team, whether that be a volunteer team or a staff team, that mission's very, very aligned with the value. Our value is, winning. And why do we want to win? Because X, Y, Z. Maybe people have a couple different reasons why winning is so important to them, but I bond with my team over it. And I think for the most part, it makes us all stronger that we are so invested in it emotionally, particularly when your job is to motivate other people through organizing or through training. I show up fully motivated and I don't hide it. And honestly, sometimes I even cry a little bit when I'm like public speaking. I don't know if I cried in the training that you came to, not like sobbing, but at least a little bit. And I always hope people don't think it's fake. Like, I promise I don't plan it. I'm like a little bit embarrassed every time it happens. I'm not being fake. I just, like, when I start to talk about, why organizing matters, or the work that was done in California 10 to flip that congressional district, I feel some type of way. So on one hand, do I handle it? I don't know. I lean into it. But at the same time, it's kind of like what I said about the job search thing. You have to remind yourself who you are outside of work. Sometimes, even if you have a big day, you have to like do something to find balance. So for me, friends are big. I have a lot of like long distance friendships because of the nature of moving around so much. Taking big or small trips and time off is really big. When I was working in Nevada for some of the time, I was based in Reno, which is an hour away from Lake Tahoe, of all places. And so sometimes, especially early on in the campaign, we would have a day off a week, which for campaigns, I was like, oh my God, this is the most free time I've ever had. This is wild. I would do like solo hiking in Lake Tahoe, or I would meet a friend there, or I would, I drove to San Francisco for a friend's going away party. That was 5 hours because luckily I had just barely enough time to do it. So that having the change of scenery is big. Of course, friends and changes of scenery are so much harder during the pandemic. You can't really safely do those things. So in the pandemic, it's been more about like taking care of my body. I have really let that slide in the past, to be like, okay, I have time to exercise and eat healthy later. Right now, I just have time for this. We need to stop doing that. And anyone who's listening, like, just stop. You have to, like, I've allowed myself to get into cooking and Pilates and like jogging and hiking a little bit. And even it's so important for me, at least, to push myself to sleep a little bit more instead of spending the extra 30 to 90 minutes scrolling on Instagram. That is
Yeah.
like, that's not an ideal behavior for me to be doing. And so every time I like take time and do anything intentional to take care of me as a person, I then feel so good about myself, because it's like, it reminds me every time that I'm being intentional about valuing myself. And then it's even better for my confidence and self-esteem. I also try to carve out a little bit of time for quirky things that bring me joy. If there is a karaoke office, a karaoke place within 30 miles of the campaign office, I will find it, I will hunt it down, and I will bring half the office and we will do karaoke.
Nice.
That brings me so much joy. I'm kind of a diva, and I like to do photo shoots. So if I ever get like a new merch item, like from like if they send us t-shirts or mugs or something, I'll do a little photo shoot. I took 30 minutes to do a photo shoot of me with my ballot this November. I was so excited. I did it in October because I voted early, right? Because I'm a good voter. But I'd have like slow-mo footage of me like prancing around the yard with my ballot, that kind of thing. For whatever reason, it brings me so much joy. And so if I have 30 minutes to do that, I'll do it. It ends up being, an hour, because I do my hair, my makeup, my wardrobe. You know, you have to. You owe it to the people. Yeah.
Yeah, you have people you're serving. So with karaoke, one of my best friends and I would go during college, and I was in San Diego, and there was this area called Convoy, and they would have these like places you could rent a private karaoke room.
Yes. Oh, those are fun.
Oh, it was great. Like I would rap. I don't sing well.
Yeah.
And then she would sing like opera.
Oh my God, what?
But like, it was just ridiculous. And we were both, I don't know, it was questionable talent. And we'd get food and stuff. So what's your like go-to? My go-to is usually like an Eminem one, because I have a few memorized. What's your go-to?
Okay, I don't have a one go-to. If I do one over and over, it gets stale. It's not my best performance. Okay? Yes. So, but I usually do songs by like female pop divas. Mm-hmm. Like a Pink song, a Rihanna song, a Britney song. You can't go wrong with Britney. You cannot.
No. Did you see the documentary yet, by the way?
No, I need to watch it.
Watch it. Yeah, and anyone listening, watch it. I mean, I don't want to get into it right now, but it was like really rough.
I'm kind of like, I know it's going to be like emotionally a lot to see. I know I'll be mad at the world after I see it. So
yeah, you will. Yeah. So that's good. So you go with and do you sing well, or is it just enthusiasm?
Okay, I'm not going to lie. I kind of do sing well. I was like a choir and a theater kid growing up, and I kind of tapered off that in college. But I've been in the musical Annie 3 times.
Really?
How does that happen? 3 times.
Yeah.
In junior high and high school, and once in community theater. I don't know. Yeah, I'm decent, but it's not okay. I was good. My talents have also tapered off. So sometimes, am I on pitch? No. But am I enthusiastic? Yes.
Yes. There we go.
I bring the pop diva energy, even if I don't bring the pop diva quality.
That's good. I mean, hey, that's you could audition for American Idol with that. A lot of people do.
They wouldn't have me. I would possibly bomb and be one of those people who they show who's like the example of like someone who came in with too much confidence. Yeah. That might be me. Thank you for saying that.
Hey, you know what? Those reels do something too.
Yeah.
So okay, so we've talked about your passion of karaoke, right? Mm-hmm. Which is awesome. But what are issues that you are most passionate about? Just in general, we've talked a bit about them actually throughout this, and then have you ever had to work with a candidate who doesn't necessarily reflect your exact values? I think it's hard. What I noticed, I'll just tell you what I noticed, because I've been volunteering for like 20 years now, at least doing voter registration now in campaigns. And I would say I saw a big shift just as like a person on the sidelines, because of just people are more progressive now. I mean, there's a whole progressive wing of the party. And so someone like me who was a little bit older and hadn't had to do a mind shift to get there, I saw a lot of differences in people kind of talking and working with candidates who were maybe more moderate than them. So I don't know if that's an issue for you, but that's just kind of where I'm coming from with the question. So yeah, like what issues are you most passionate about, and how do you even handle if a candidate's not exactly aligned where you are? Like how do you keep working that way?
Reproductive rights for me are probably like the number one. Luckily, I rarely hear of Democrats who stray from the party line on that. I have, what would I do? I mean, I haven't worked for a candidate who did not support reproductive rights. I don't think I would for that one. And you would almost have to search to find someone who didn't support that. And, you know, yeah, the party is moving to the left. I'm pretty happy about that. For me, the priority has been keeping Democratic majorities everywhere possible and to have a Democrat. Does every candidate I worked for agree with like every single little thing for me? Probably not every single thing, but 95%. Yeah. So for me, I'd much rather have somebody in office who is 95% aligned and a good person and an effective leader than sit it out, not work on that campaign, maybe have the Republican win. Absolutely not, and winning the House was kind of like that. Like a lot of moderates won in moderate areas where, likely somebody more progressive couldn't win. And so am I mad at those people for their more moderate stances? No, they're meeting the needs of their district. And for me, like that's what it is. There are people who see their role in the movement as, creating those progressive standard bearers. And I think that's an important role. That's not the role that I see myself in. I see myself as somebody who wants to like fight in these competitive seats. And so for me, them having values and policies I'm aligned with, that's important. But just as important is, are they somebody who can win? Are they viable? Are we putting our resources and our time into a winnable fight? That's quite important to me. And it's also quite important to me that the person is able to be effective, that I know that when they get in office, they are going to be able to work with people. And sometimes they're going to have to work with people when they're in the minority, And so that's one of the things that I love about Joe Biden. I will never stop talking about Joe Biden. I love him so much. He has really proven that he is able to work with people. He's able to work with Democrats. He's able to work with Republicans, and he's able to get stuff done. And, I personally have benefited from the ACA being law of the land. And had he not been the one going through the halls of Congress, having hard conversations with people, I don't know if the ACA would have passed. I don't know what kind of ACA it would have looked like. So those are all things that's really important to me. And one of the good things about working on campaigns is you generally sign up for that candidate in particular, or even if you're working for the party, it's like, who the candidate is. And so I've never had a candidate like thrust upon me and it's like, you have to work for this person. It's like, I was able to choose, so that's great. That's been great. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. And yeah, I mean, it's true. Like a lot of the basic issues, you're not going to find really conflict overall.
Yeah, you're not really going to find a Democrat who wants us to have less healthcare, less education,
right?
More racism. Yeah. You're not, and that's the nice thing about, okay, the party system's not ideal, of course, in a lot of ways. That's not a hot take, but there is something to be said for like, there's a party line that people don't usually stray super far from on a lot of issues. And just having the Democratic majority, we can see how much of a difference that made in 2018, even when that was, the only thing that we had on the national level. And of course, oh my gosh, it's amazing that Joe Biden right now has Congress and effectively the Senate too. So that majority is so important. And again, the 95% thing is huge. I would never expect a candidate to be exactly who I want them to be.
Right.
And that's life. But, what can we do to make our government a little bit better?
Yeah. That's exactly it. And just like you serving the way you are, did you seek out to work on a presidential campaign? And you did?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, I actually thought about trying to work on the presidential campaign in 2016. I'm really happy where I ended up. I met some of my best friends on the Ami Bera campaign, but right after that, I was like, what are we all doing in 4 years? Where do you need me? And so I kind of planned my career with that in mind, knowing that I wanted to eventually work on the eventual Democratic candidates general election campaign. And even right after 2018, everybody I talked to, I was like, I want to be on the presidential. What do you know? I want to be the presidential. What do you know? Some people in politics, I feel like kind of feel like they happened upon their career. Mm-hmm. For me, parts of it have been very intentional. I have been plotting and vying to work on the presidential campaign for years. And then I feel so blessed that it worked out for me.
That's awesome. That's great. Mm-hmm. So like I mentioned, at the beginning, I became aware of you specifically at the National Day of Service event, the Equity and Service Training. And so this past year, meaning, 2020 really, there was a huge cultural shift on the issues of diversity and inclusion. And that encompasses like race and sex and sexuality, which your training covered. I'll tell you, because as someone who, and I've talked about quite a bit on this podcast, but I'm someone who, the service is a huge part of my life, even though I have a career in IT, whatever, right? And I do comedy. So those have nothing to do with service, but it's huge. And I had never been in a training like that where it was really talking about issues like even, don't come in and just think you're saving people and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Like that's a thing with nonprofits too. People think they're going to do that, but it's really serving others, and it's yourself a little bit, but because you feel good about it. So can you just talk about your work around service? And you work with a lot of volunteers, mm-hmm. right? Which, we already mentioned that too, but then also like maybe specifically those issues around diversity and inclusion and equity. Mm-hmm. And even if you can define those for people, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one thing I want to say up top is I am not really an expert in this area. Right. There are people whose whole career is mm-hmm. DEI work, DEI standing for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's, I don't want to,
right.
plump myself up. But I mean, I do have, of course, lived experience in the area. I'm a woman. I'm a person of color. I'm a Latina. And like I said, I got to explore that a lot in college because of the social justice affinity group that I was a part of. And I was exposed to a lot of language and thought ideas. I took classes having to do with this. I read articles. I talked to friends about it a lot in college. And when I actually started working in politics, I didn't talk as much about that stuff at work. Mm-hmm. It informed why I was there and why a lot of us were there, but we didn't explicitly discuss it at work a lot. And it kind of came back to the forefront of things we actually talk about in work meetings after the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
Of course, all over the country it did. And we had meetings on the Biden campaign. It was still the general election had not started yet at that time, really. It was still mostly the smaller primary staff. We had staff meetings where it was kind of an open floor for staffers to share how they felt about what was happening, just to kind of process and unpack in community. And then there were also spaces provided for people to give feedback to the campaign, which I was pretty impressed that those spaces were created. And I felt very strongly about it. And I kind of felt like I was on the more senior side among field staffers. Mm-hmm. And I felt that, one of the things that happens on campaigns is not just sometimes volunteers having problematic attitudes towards voters, sometimes, mm-hmm. Maybe feeling like you're saving somebody because you're going to their neighborhood telling them to vote. That's not a great attitude, of course. Sometimes there are definitely some microaggressions that happen. Volunteers will say things to staff, particularly staff of color, staff who are queer, staff who are trans. There are some things that staffers experience. And so I felt very strongly about it. I ended up writing in my free time like a 10-page memo of recommendations that I had for the campaign. And I did some research on implicit biases and equitable hiring practices because I knew that within the next month, we were going to staff up to thousands of staffers from a few hundred, and we were going to be hiring a lot of people. And the people who work on presidential campaigns, that's a big career boost. A bunch of them are going to end up working in the administration. A bunch of them are going to go on to run the Democratic Party. People were very, very cool. And several people, kind of high up in the campaign took meetings with me and heard me out. And some of the things that I was proposing were actually already planning to happen. So that was really, really cool. One of the things that I proposed was that we train not just staff, but also volunteers on these issues. My thought process being that there are a lot of very well-intentioned people who want to do right by these issues, but don't necessarily know where to start. And my thought process was that as the Democratic campaign, our voice was given a lot of weight, whether or not it should on this issue. Our people placed some amount of trust in us and were willing to listen to our voice and had the exposure to it. So I was like, this is something that we can do. That is, we do all these trainings. This is something that's relatively within our lane. And so that ended up being the start of me getting to manage the project of making these volunteer trainings happen. We had some amazing people who built staff trainings for all staff and trainings for managers on these issues. My one little piece was doing it for volunteers. And so one of the trainings that I'm really proud of is a training on equity and voting rights. And we wanted to really give people the awareness that sometimes you're going to have a conversation with somebody who doesn't have the same attitude towards voting that you are. And traditionally, and your listeners may or may not know this, kind of the typical profile, if you will, of a Democratic volunteer is a college-educated white woman, and particularly a middle-aged white woman, and that's sort of the typical profile.
Raising my hand. Well, I resent being middle-aged, but it's true. But yeah, go ahead.
and of course, we want all the volunteers. So it's like we're not telling anybody to stop volunteering, obviously, but we wanted to have people think about how can we make volunteering more accessible, more welcoming for people who are not that demographic, and particularly for the people who are most impacted by the results of this election. So that was one thing we did. We also did a training on hosting equity-informed events. But our training on equity and voting rights, it focused on the idea that, sometimes folks do come in with this attitude of, oh God, this person didn't want to vote. They're just stupid. They don't understand, or they don't care, or they don't get it. And that's a problematic attitude, to think that you know more about somebody, because it's very informed by your lived experience. And if someone has been experiencing so many types of systemic structural oppression stacked on top of each other, if the government has not historically done right by them or people like them, it's not, we shouldn't be out here being surprised, shocked, clutching our pearls that somebody's not excited to vote. Yeah. And so that was a training where we did talk about, active listening and meeting people where they are and being authentic. And when you're talking to somebody, being aware about your own relationship with privilege and oppression. And I mean, that's something that I'm very proud of. I feel very strongly about it. And I hope that we'll have, more of those conversations as time goes on. And then when I was working on the presidential inaugural committee, we did a similar training for the day of service, knowing, like you said, some people come in with a savior complex to think that they're saving people. And it's really not about that. So when you're serving people, you should really be thinking about, what's the root cause and what's your relationship with the root cause? Have you perhaps benefited from the very thing that is causing that problem? You need to approach it a little bit differently. And maybe this story is for you that you have also been harmed by the issue at hand, and you can approach things a little differently that way. So that's what I have been doing. My lane has just been in making some of these trainings happen and being a starting point for people to think about these issues. And we always encourage people to continue to educate themselves, because it's not fair to ask somebody who is impacted by a particular type of oppression, it's not fair to ask that person to educate you. It's a lot of emotional labor. So that was part of the reason of providing a training. It's like, okay, don't ask these harmful questions to people who you're going to burden, come to this training and listen. And here are some ways that you can continue to think about this and educate yourself.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I mean, really just to have to take the insight you have and then to research and then to come up with the training program. I thought it was fantastic. And
thank you.
Yeah, I really loved it. And it did change a little bit about how I look at myself as a volunteer. Because with campaign volunteering, I mean, it's an interesting thing because like this year was a lot about phone calls because you could only do that. Well, I was in England too, or I am in England. I could only do phone calls, right?
Yeah.
So it's like after work, just do phone calls. But even then, when I would go into it some days, like, oh, I don't want to do this. Because I didn't. I was like, oh God, I don't want to do this, but I have to. Like, and I would have that kind of attitude. And then some days I'd go into it, all right, let's see what we get. And you could have such different conversations with people when you'd get them on the phone and when they wouldn't yell at you. But yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, you're right about volunteers, actually, just thinking about that. And one thing I had trouble with, and I don't know, I'll be interested in what you think. I mean, is like, I tried to get friends and family to volunteer, and it's really hard because I'm motivated a certain way and I've always done it. I don't know, do you find like it's hard even for you, even though you're working in it? Do you ever try to get friends and family to do stuff and they don't want to do it? And how do you feel about it? Because I was getting a bit resentful, to be honest, during the campaign. Like,
Absolutely. It is so hard. It is so hard. You never know what you're going to get. You never know if you're going to get somebody who yells at you and, feels inconvenienced by your call, or if you're going to get somebody who literally did not know this one crucial piece about voting and now they will, because you're going to go, you never know. And I have a confession. I will say this on the record. I have at times knocked on a door and made a phone call and prayed to God, please don't answer.
Oh,
please don't answer. I have done that on hard days, but I am always trying to get family. Like, that's all my Instagram story ever is volunteer. Have you volunteered for this? Have you volunteered for that? And I mean, at this point, all of my friends are like, most of the people who I know are working on campaigns themselves, or I met them because they volunteered. But it is hard. But the reason why we do it is because it works. We would not ask people to go through this sometimes stressful experience because of that. And we try to make it the best experience possible by having a community in place for support and by having a training that prepares people for what they're going to experience. But, I think actually the fact that phone calls and door knocks are in some ways so unglamorous are actually what makes them effective, because this is a one-on-one conversation where you're putting yourself out there. You don't know what's going to happen when you go to the door, when somebody answers. And I honestly think that voters on the other side have a certain extent of appreciation for that. And that's why you've probably also had a lot of people tell you, thank you for calling. Like, even if I've had people be like, oh, I can't talk right now, but thank you for calling, or, oh, I'm voting for another candidate, but thank you for calling. Because I think people get that there's a certain humility in that. And just the fact that we are willing to even make that effort as individuals, it helps make the case for the candidate that somebody literally cared enough to spend a couple hours on the phone not knowing what's going to happen. And I really think person-to-person voter contact is the purest form of democracy for that exact reason. So, I mean, I want to say it absolutely works. And the good conversations, they make up for it. They
do. Yeah.
They really do. I've had obviously so many wonderful conversations. I've knocked on and made thousands and thousands of phone calls and door knocks. When I was in Las Vegas I was knocking on doors for the caucus for Joe. And, one day I was getting so many not homes. I'm going around like this apartment complex, just literally nobody was there. I was like, where is everybody? finally, this couple answered. They were a Puerto Rican couple, and they spoke mostly Spanish, and I speak Spanish too. And so we were able to communicate. You're only supposed to stay there for 5 minutes because you've got to keep moving. But I was like, you know what? I haven't talked to anybody else today. And because I don't speak perfect Spanish, there was a tiny bit of like a language barrier. And so it took a little bit longer to communicate. But they, in fact, were trying to figure out how the caucus process worked. It changed. It used to be you had to go in person on the day of. Now you could do early in person. So I'm explaining that to them. We're explaining like, here's the places where you could go. We end up just staying there for a while. And, we talked about like what it meant to us as Latinos to be in this fight against Donald Trump, and just how much it meant to us that we were going to vote and participate in the democratic process. Mm-hmm. And we even talked about, they pulled out some travel photographs. I love photography. We're like talking about their travels. And when I go to a door and I really click with the folks, and if I think they might need help voting, I'll write down like my personal cell phone for them. Mm-hmm. And they actually called me, not just once, but twice. They called me to tell me that they had gone to vote early. And then months later, there was a local election in Las Vegas, and hardly anybody votes in local elections, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They called me to see how they could vote in that. And so we talked about the voting by mail process and where they could drop it off and how they could mail it in and by when. And that's extremely gratifying to connect with somebody that way and to know that, that you were helpful.
Yeah.
It's extremely gratifying.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. When I was calling for Georgia, I was calling for Reverend Warnock, and I ended up talking to this guy for like 15 minutes, which I'm just going to say now because no one's going to find out, or find me. But yeah, he was just super cool. We were just talking. I mean, it was great, so I know it's just, it's such a cool thing and to get to do. And then you're working with volunteers a lot. So on the Biden campaign, what was your role? Like your actual role?
My role changed from day 1 to day 500 and something. I was actually working on the campaign for a long, long, long time. I worked in field and training. And so in Nevada, I was a deputy organizing director. So I was in charge of kind of like half the state for field. And my role was to, help run the field team and make sure that people had what they needed, make sure that we got all of our folks hired. And then towards the end of the Nevada caucus, I moved down to Vegas, and I was effectively the out-of-state director. And so I had a small team, and our job was to bring in volunteers from outside of Nevada to come volunteer in the final days. And then after Nevada, I was sent to Texas and then Florida to be part of the organizing teams there.
Wow.
And that was so fun. What a whirlwind, man. What a whirlwind week. The week from the Nevada caucus to Super Tuesday, the Jim Clyburn endorsement, winning South Carolina, getting a bunch of Democratic endorsements. I will never forget that week of my life and the people I was with in Texas for it. That was magical. Unfortunately, a couple days before the Florida primary, COVID really ramped up. And so everyone got sent home. And I really appreciated how the campaign really, really cared about our safety. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what this means for my job, my safety. They set it up so that we did everything remotely. We did a bunch of remote organizing. And so for the first, for like March through, June, before the general really started in high gear, we were doing remote organizing, and we were organized into pods. So I was part of the Southeast pod, which included states like Texas and Florida and Georgia and I think North Carolina. And so we were doing remote organizing there, as well as in other states that were not swing states. And our main goal was to introduce ourselves to volunteers and to get people started organizing, to get people started, recruiting volunteers and, building up our list, building up our movement. So that was cool. We did a lot of like creative events, and that was a time where we weren't super focused on doing a ton of phone calls. So we could really lean into investing in relationships with people and with volunteer leaders. So that was a cool time. And then in the general election, I was on the training team. I was a deputy national training director. And that was remote too, actually. And so our job was to build all the training materials for all the staff in the States and volunteers in the States. And my one specific piece of that was working with the distributed organizing team. They did all the organizing for non-battleground states. And so it was structured really differently. We would usually have staff on the ground or virtually on the ground in the battleground states, but it doesn't scale to do that. There are so many volunteers in California and New York, and we have volunteers in more red states too, Oklahoma, Wyoming. There are people there who want to volunteer. And so our job was to make it as easy as possible for those folks to volunteer. And so my role within that was to build training content and work with that team to build and amend that training content, slides, training videos, guides, written guides, how to use this tool, how to use that tool. That was what I was doing. It was amazing. I feel so passionately about training. We have to invest in our people. You know, if somebody is interested in helping the campaign, we should give them every tool that we can so that they feel prepared and supported in doing that. So it was amazing. It was great.
That's cool. It's funny. In my job, I do training. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah. Like we build a system like in this one software, and then we have to train the people to use it. And I've done that in a couple jobs, and it is a really cool thing because you learn a lot about how to communicate in a specific way to enable people to do something. It's fun.
Yeah. And you think about like how adults learn and what makes them motivated to learn and whatnot.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. What was the week? I'll tell you, there's been a couple times now where I've had these emotional, just completely like, I don't know, just either sobbed or just felt completely drained. And one of them was inauguration week, I'll tell you, just because it was stressful worrying about him. Yeah. Honestly, for like a couple weeks, worried about this man. And then after he's in, and then you're just like, oh, wow, this is over. But then there was also, and this man, I mean, the president of the United States, that I'm referring to him respectfully as this man now. That's great. But then also like that week when we were waiting for the results, and we had all told ourselves, like people who were really aware had told ourselves, and I told my mom a million times, like, we're not going to know. We just need to be calm. But then it was such a rough, like, several days. How did you, having been so intimately involved in it for so long, just how was it for you? I'm just curious. Like,
oh man, it was a very draining week. Election night, I don't know if you remember election night. Of course, everyone remembers. It kind of looked like Trump was winning a tiny bit, because he was like ahead, and I think people were shell shocked. Some people were shell shocked, even if they knew that wasn't the final result. It's like I think it ended up being quite a blowout victory for Biden, but it really did not look that way on election night. No. I remember going to bed being like kind of confused and stunned. I remember physically getting into bed and feeling like my body was moving through sand. That's how like weird emotionally I felt. Luckily, the next morning, the campaign was really good. I thought about messaging like, hey, we honestly have like so many more votes still to come in. And, looking at the data and looking at the trends, it actually looks like we're going to win and win by a significant margin. And so I was, luckily I'm surrounded by so many campaign staffers who were saying that to each other. We're posting it online, and we're like, well, look, we did everything we could. But the one thing that actually we did do is we did something called ballot curing in the days after. So, right? Okay. Yeah. Did you volunteer for that?
I did for Georgia, but yeah, go ahead. Because a lot of people probably don't know what it is.
Yeah. So if you're not familiar with ballot curing, it's when somebody doesn't sign their ballot, or when somebody's signature doesn't match a signature on file, they have to just submit a little affidavit form saying, yes, that was me. I voted. That's a legit vote. And so people don't always know that that's even a thing that they would have to do, of course. And so you call folks and you say, hey, there may have been an issue with your ballot. Can you turn in this form? Or sometimes you actually even go to their house. And so luckily we were busy with that. So I had something to do every day. And so I just put all my energy into that. And watched a lot of CNN that week, but we love CNN. Yeah, I mean, luckily I had something to throw myself in. I will never forget. I don't think any of us will ever forget the Saturday that it was called for Joe.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful day.
Well, yeah, that was one of the times I'll say I just bawled. I mean, because and that was a big catalyst. I actually signed up for. I'm doing a public leadership credential at Harvard Kennedy, and
whoa, cool.
Part of what made me just say it's time to really commit more to learning more so you can serve better was their speeches that night. The president, and the vice president. But I remember that day. Yeah. Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah. I get weepy every time Kamala speaks. Oh gosh, she's amazing.
I know, it's like it really has, I mean, in a way, maybe made us all cry more, like all this. So maybe some of the criticism are true. Yes, we are very emotional people. Fine.
Yeah.
Leave us alone. That's so cool. I mean, that's just great that you were getting to work. Not you got to, but that you. I don't want to say you got to do something. I hate when people say that, like, oh, you're lucky you got to do this. But it's really cool that you worked so hard and you decided you wanted something and you went for it and you worked in that role like that you were in, and on the campaign you wanted to be on. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that, but I do feel lucky,
Sure.
I can feel every day that it's a privilege and not everybody gets to do that. Not everybody has the flexibility in their life to go through that kind of experience. And everybody gets to where they are because other people take chances on them and invest in them and believe in them. And a lot of people have done that for me, and that'll never be lost on me.
No, and that's true. And to be grateful for those things is important. Well, on that note of not everyone can do that. Not everyone can do the kind of lifestyle you have for whatever reason. And
that's reasonable.
Yeah, that's fair. But what are ways you would like to see people get involved in their communities and that you've become familiar with?
Okay, I have some thoughts on this. The first thing I want to say is to anyone listening, if you are thinking about getting involved, please do it. We need you. And we need you now more than ever. Historically, something that happens after a Democrat wins in the presidential year, Democrats have horrible luck. And not luck, they have horrible results in elections because there's less of a public eye on it, and people aren't always as motivated because we feel like we can go home. And so hopefully nobody feels like we can give up now. But we need to be doing work on campaigns at the congressional level, at the federal level, at the local level. We need to be winning state legislatures for Democrats. We need to be winning local seats, city council, school board, and we need people to be doing advocacy around issues at every level of government. So please, we cannot get complacent. We need you. Whether you feel like you know a lot about politics or whether you feel like you don't, you have a voice. We need you to use that voice. So I just want to say that up top. So one thing is volunteering on Democratic campaigns. You can usually find info on how to get started on a website. Sometimes there will just be a contact form where you can say I'm interested in volunteering. And often, give people sometimes a few weeks, depending on the campaign, to follow up with you. So that's one thing. There's a website called Mobilize America that a lot of Democratic campaigns are using, and other progressive orgs and other nonprofits. And it's a volunteer sign-up platform. So if you go to Mobilize America, you could even just search events in your area. And most of these events these days are virtual. And you could figure out a way to get started. You can also get involved with your local Democratic Party or Democratic club. Local Democratic parties at the county level usually have a website where they list all the Democratic clubs, and you can find the meeting information there. That's a really good way to actually get to meet people who are running for local office. A lot of Democrats running for local office make the rounds of the Democratic clubs. And so you could meet somebody that way, and somebody who sparks your interest, you could volunteer for them. If you live in an area that's really blue and you want to work on winning Democratic majorities elsewhere because it's not as neat in your area, check out Swing Left and Sister District. they organize volunteers. Well, they actually have volunteers self-organize in blue areas, especially like blue cities, to volunteer and just create all this extra air support for swing, for purple districts, for state legislature, for Congress, for Senate even. So that's a great organization. And some folks, of course, may not feel very connected to the Democratic Party, may not want to do something quite like that. You might check out something like Indivisible. They started as like an anti-Trump organization that encouraged people to form local chapters. They, in the 2018 cycle, at least, they were pretty active doing, direct actions and holding people accountable for their votes. So if that's something that interests you, a lot of those organizations have sometimes gone in different directions at the local level, but that's a really good thing to check out. Or if there's an issue that you feel strongly about or that you're passionate about, look up those organizations in your area and see, maybe they have a volunteer info meeting, maybe they just have some other kind of public event that you can go to, or you can just send an email saying that, you're interested and kind of what your availability is like. The important thing is, I think of organizing as showing up and following up, and it's 10% showing up and 90% following up. And so whatever time you have to give matters. If you can show up to one event, be it a protest, a phone bank, a meeting, once a year, that means something. If you can show up 12 times a year, once a month, that matters. If you can show, the more you're able to show up, the better. But don't think that just because you don't have a lot of time, that the time that you do have to give won't be appreciated. It is appreciated. It does matter. I think of these things in terms of the ladder of engagement. People may start out with more easy levels of engagement, posting on social media, being a voter. You step it up another level. Maybe you're attending a rally, attending a protest. You step it up another level. Maybe you're volunteering, to phone bank for an organization. You step it up more. Maybe you're helping set up these volunteer opportunities, and you step it up more and more. You have, bigger organizational duties. And so whatever level you can be at, it matters, and it's all part of this ecosystem. So don't think that what you have to give is not enough. Give what you can. And if you're able to give more and step up on the ladder of engagement, step up and give a little bit more. And when you step up, it has like this compounding effect, because if you can go to 12 different organizations, 12 different meetings, that's one thing. If you can go to 12 different meetings of the same organization, you can be part of the fabric of that organization in a bigger way and make even bigger contributions to that one organization and their mission. So that's what I'd say. And whatever you do, goodness, please vote in every single election that you're eligible for, and don't snooze on the local elections. They're really important. And as Democrats, I guess I'm mostly speaking to Democrats here. We have historically snoozed on so many elections, and that's the only reason why we've lost them, so we need to all be taking it, you figure out when those local elections are and actually make sure that you're telling your family and friends about them. Because a lot of people would vote if they just knew that this is when the election is and it's important to vote.
That's true. And I 100% agree too. Like whatever people can do, that's the contribution they can make that matters. I think a lot of people will say even to me like, oh, you do so much, I can't do anything. Well, don't do what I'm do, because then I can go, oh, well, Oprah does so much, I can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? But that's fine. That's what she can do that. So let her. I can't. I'm not buying anyone a car.
Yeah.
Right. But I'll make some phone calls, whatever. And I just feel like, people kind of diminish their own value sometimes, and then use that as an excuse not to do anything. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah, exactly. And I always hear, the nonprofit space in particular, I think often uses the phrase time, talent, treasure. Like sometimes you can give all those, sometimes one of them. Maybe some folks listening can't give much time or talent, but they can give treasure. Giving money matters. That's how people like me get hired to do work. That's how organizations like keep their lights on. And, some people have a special skill that they can put to use. Sometimes your special skill can't be put to use with a particular organization. That's fine. You know, if you can give time and are willing to do what might feel like grunt work, like that work matters. People aren't asking you to do that, you know, just for a, you know, meaningless sacrifice. It's because it helps, it matters.
Yeah.
So really whatever you can give, it will be well received.
Yeah, I agree. So, I have this set of questions, the fun 5 that I like to ask. But before that, do you have any, like, we've talked a lot. I think we've given a lot of advice and you have, but is there any like mantra or advice that you want to share just as a last
Yes. Most problems can be solved with a good spreadsheet or by having a hard conversation. That's my advice. Try and think of a problem that can't be solved by one or both of those things. I dare you. No, I'm sure there are some problems.
Yeah, but that's good. No, and I won't try to think of one now, but I like the spreadsheet thing. Yeah, people know about my Google Sheets.
Oh, okay.
You submitted a Google form to me, right?
I did. I was like, this is organized. I like this.
Cool. All right. So there's the fun 5. So what's the oldest t-shirt you have and still wear?
I have a Wicked t-shirt that I got from when I was 13. It's a long sleeve t-shirt. It's a black t-shirt. It is heavy in my quarantine rotation.
Yeah.
I wear it a lot. I love it. I told you I was a musical theater person.
Yes.
Still am at heart.
Did you see that? Did you see Dear Evan Hansen?
I haven't. I've heard it's really good though.
It's great. And so you can listen to the soundtrack online, but they're making a movie of it. So I just can't wait. So I was like, gonna nerd out with you on that. Okay, cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's great. All right.
That's cool.
Cool. I love it. Wicked. It's been said, and I think we've all experienced this, that it's been like Groundhog's Day for about a year now, because ever since the pandemic started. So in the movie, Bill Murray listens to I Got You, Babe as his, not really listens to it, but it's his alarm clock song that wakes him up. What would your alarm clock song be if every day was Groundhog's Day?
Okay, so it's funny because I like almost have an alarm clock song, and it's Work Bitch by Britney Spears. Can I curse on this podcast?
Yeah,
okay.
Little checkbox I do if you do, so you're fine.
Okay. That song, if I ever am having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning, I listen to that song, and by the end of it, my feet are on the ground. I'm out of bed. It's magical. It's magical. So it's not literally my alarm, but I play it many a morning. So much, in fact, that my Spotify Wrapped had it as like one of my top 5 most played. And I am in the top 0.1% of Britney Spears listeners on Spotify. It is an honor I do not take lightly.
No, that is a status.
It is a status. Yeah.
It is.
I'm updating my LinkedIn.
Yeah, you should. You should.
0.1% of Britney Spears listeners.
Yeah, you're in some 1%. So that's good. And 0.1%. Yeah. Oh, nice. Okay, that's cool. All right. Coffee or tea or neither?
Tea and herbal tea only, because this is me with no caffeine. So when I drink coffee or like black tea, it is too much. It is really too much. I am an herbal tea only person.
Okay, that's good. You know, can you think of a time that you like laughed so hard you cried or couldn't stop, or just something that makes you do that? Like maybe there's like I don't know if you saw that Zoom, that cat.
That was what I was gonna say.
Okay, so fine. So is there anything, I'll just ask it again, but I have already interrupted you on that one or taken it. But yeah, so what video or something makes you laugh uncontrollably?
Well, I'm not sure if we'll still be talking about this when this podcast airs, but the video of the lawyer on Zoom with the cat filter who says, "I'm really here, I'm not a cat," that has made me laugh so many times. I'll be innocently scrolling on social media. It pops up. I laugh again. It's wholesome fun. It's what we needed as a country, honestly. It really is. I just, even now, it's just this, he was so sad. Like, well, I think it's funny because it was so, like, earnest, you know?
Yeah, the eyes just looking down.
In the beginning where he's like, what? And with the cat eyes, oh, it's so funny.
Well, what cracked me up, because I watched it so many times, I was analyzing every piece of it. You know the dude in the top right? Like, did you watch him yet? Have you paid attention to him?
Not close attention.
Okay. So you have to, and anyone listening, you'll have to do this later. So, because I told my mom and someone else, and basically, he looks like he's asleep, almost. Because he's kind of looking at his phone or something. And just right when the guy goes, whatever, I'm here live, I'm not a cat.
Oh my god.
Then the guy just does this smirk. That's private. So now it cracks me up. It's like layers, right?
Oh my gosh.
So even though I did ruin your answer, I'll leave that in, but then we have your answer too. But yeah, it's great. I mean, that was the best video. My boss actually sent it. Like, what a cool boss.
That is a good boss. Yeah.
A good boss, just know what the people want.
Great workplace culture.
Yeah, it is. So then we were like, all right. And the last one, who inspires you right now?
Jen O'Malley Dillon, Biden's campaign manager. We would have these weekly staff calls where we would get on Zoom once the pandemic started, and she would give us a campaign update and give us a lot of insight she was like, it was the perfect balance between hopeful and forthright and steady and confident. She was very level-headed, and she was very caring about our safety. And I also really appreciated that she was a mom who was doing a badass job. I don't even know if I want to be a mom, but it always gives me hope to see somebody who I really look up to independently for everything that they're doing at work, also having this huge other part of their life. And it just gives me so much hope. So she inspires me. Every time I think about her, I'm like, I need to step it up. I need to be like Jen. We can do it.
That's great. That's awesome. Well, Lucia, it's been amazing talking to you. I really enjoyed this.
This has been so fun.
Good. Yeah. So is there anything you want to promote, like you want people to do? I mean, I know you're looking, we'll see if you're still looking for a job at the time, if they look you up, but yeah, where do people go to find you?
Twitter would be best. My Twitter is at Lucia Nuñez 6, and just the digit 6. I might make a TikTok later. Don't hold your breath. I might not, but just Twitter, Lucia Nuñez 6 on Twitter.
Okay, cool. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes and online. But thanks so much.
Thank you. This has been amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me this week. You can find out more about our guest in the show notes. The music you're probably moving to by now is by Joe Mafia. Find him on Spotify. That's Joe, Maffia. And Rob Medke is responsible for our visual design. You can find him online by searching for Rob, Metke. Thanks, Rob. Let us know who you'd like to hear from or about your own experiences defining yourself outside of work at More Than Work Pod on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Give us a follow. Or visit our website at rabiasaid.com. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening to More Than Work. We'll be back next week with another guest. In the meantime, while being kind to others, don't forget to be kind to yourself.